Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Defense contractors face a new restriction. A new law now prohibits the Pentagon from contracting with companies that retain consultants lobbying for certain Chinese firms blacklisted by the department. For more, Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis spoke with Covington's election and political law lawyer, Zachary Parks.
This law is a big deal. It became effective yesterday. It prohibits the Department of War from entering into government contracts with any entity that contracts with a consulting firm or other firm that engages in what they call lobbying activities for a Chinese military company client. So in other words, the government is saying that if your firm is hiring a consultant that is helping Chinese military companies engage in lobbying, we, the government, don't want to do business with your firm.
So the lawmakers sent a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that the Defense Department should, A, ensure that the ban applies both to prospective and current clients, and they also said that the department's contractors should be encouraged to consider the full definition of lobbying activities. In the absence of rulemaking, which we will talk about, what does it say about this provision and kind of the challenges that contractors will have complying with this law now that it's in effect?
Right. Yeah, the definition of lobbying activities is very broad. It captures not just kind of standard classic DC lobbying firms, but could sweep in PR firms or consulting shops or trade associations or law firms or other consultants. Any consultant that engages in lobbying activities is potentially covered. And lobbying activities means not just reaching out to the government, communicating with government, but it can also include behind the scenes advice to clients about how they can influence U.S. policy. Contractors are now going to need to reach out to all of their consultants and obtain some sort of certification or confirmation that those consultants don't engage in lobbying activities work for companies that are listed on the Chinese military company list. So there's going to be added diligence that's going to be required for defense contractors when they engage a new consultant and when they're working with existing consultants to make sure those existing consultants are not doing covered work for Chinese military companies.
Now that the law is in effect, have you seen clients coming to you in the weeks or months prior and asking, what is this new requirement and how do I comply?
Yeah, a lot of defense contractors are grappling with this issue right now. And a lot of companies do business with the Department of Defense that you might not normally think of as defense contractors. And so a lot of companies are thinking through what they need to do, what sort of certifications they need from their consultants to ensure that they're in compliance with these rules.
And I think the issue has been that it's not widely publicized, and so contractors might not even be aware that this is now in place. What would you suggest contractors do now that the law is in effect?
Yeah, so that's very true. There hasn't been a lot of attention on the law. I would suggest that contractors do three things. First, they check their consultants to see if their consultants are registered for any Chinese military companies in the Federal Lobbying Disclosure Database and the Foreign Agents Registration Act database. That's a good step, but it's not sufficient because, again, consultants can still trigger this rule even if they're doing behind the scenes work that doesn't trigger these disclosure requirements. And so that's item number one, is to check the databases. Item number two would be obtain certifications from outside consultants, especially those consultants that might be the type of consultants that would be providing lobbying activities, to confirm that they're not doing covered work for Chinese military companies. And then three, change your kind of standard consulting agreements to include provisions in there regarding whether consultants have Chinese military company clients.
The Defense Department has this list. They really expanded it this year. They just published it in June. They added dozens of companies, but this list changes every year. How frequently should contractors reevaluate their relationships, given that this list changes pretty often? And then how should companies approach consulting or law firms with large client portfolios?
Right. So government contractors should continually kind of reevaluate this as the list is updated to make sure that their consultants are not doing business with companies that are newly added to the list. At least they're not doing lobbying activities business for those companies. And it is very common in DC and in the country for outside consultants to have lots of different clients. And so like law firms, like public affairs firms. And so it's important for defense contractors to ensure that those firms that they're using are aware of these restrictions and have processes in place to comply with them.
The law required the Defense Department to issue a DFARS rule, but they're very much behind on it. How can DoD enforce it before the rule is finalized?
Right. We don't know. In theory, the DoD could continue to enforce the statute. The statute already itself prohibits DoD from entering into contracts with defense contractors that engage in a consulting firm that works for one of these companies. So they could begin to enforce it effective immediately just by simply not entering into contracts with covered consulting firm defense contractors. So it's possible that it could be enforced effective immediately, but we're still waiting on the rules and the regulations in terms of how enforcement will look and how DoD will interpret these restrictions. Those rules could come out by July 15th, but we don't know if they'll be delayed further.
Zachary Parks is Covington's election and political law lawyer, speaking with Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis there. You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.